The storm hung around another day, but it fizzled out late Sunday night. Power came back on. School was in session as usual Monday morning. Greg endured the first half of the day and was relieved when 1:10 p.m. finally rolled around and he got to go to Advanced Scientific Theory. Advanced Scientific Theory was an AP class reserved for freshmen who had won science fair prizes in the previous 2 years. The class had only 12 students. It was taught by a visiting teacher, Mr. Jacoby, who also taught at Grays Harbor Community College. As always, Greg was the first one in the classroom. He sat in the front. Only Hadi would sit near him. Mr. Jacoby was practically bouncing at the front of the yellow-walled classroom when the bell rang. Tall and lanky, but so full of energy he reminded Greg of a long, coiled spring. Mr. Jacoby was an enthusiastic teacher who was undaunted by disinterested students. Greg loved science, all science, not just tech, and his passion had earned him the title of teacher's pet. Mr. Jacoby always lectured while darting around the front of the classroom like he had bugs in his pants. Sometimes he scribbled on the whiteboard. More often, he just rambled. But it was interesting stuff. This small room, filled with tall wooden lab tables and counter-height chairs, was one of Greg's favorite places in the school. He loved the periodic table and the constellation posters on the walls. He loved the smell of the fertilizer that fed the hybrid plants growing at the back of the room. It made him think of science and learning. Running a hand through unruly red hair, Mr. Jacoby began, "In quantum physics, there is something known as the zero-point field. This field is scientific proof that there is no such thing as a vacuum, no such thing as nothingness. If you empty all space of matter and energy, you still find, in subatomic terms, a bunch of activity. This constant activity is a field of energy that is always in motion, subatomic matter constantly interacting with other subatomic matter." Mr. Jacoby rubbed a freckled nose. "Are you all with me?" Greg nodded enthusiastically. Hadi, who sat next to him at the 3-person lab table, nudged him. "Hey, this is your shtick." Greg ignored him. Mr. Jacoby grinned at Greg and took his nod to represent the entire class, which was unwise, but Greg was fine with it. "Good," Mr. Jacoby continued. "So this energy is called the zero-point field because fluctuations in the field are still found in temperatures of absolute zero. Absolute zero is the lowest possible energy state, where everything's been removed and there should be nothing remaining to make any motion. Make sense?" Greg nodded again. "Great. So the energy should be zero, but when they measure the energy, mathematically, it never actually reaches zero. There's always some remaining vibration due to continued particle exchange. Still with me?" Greg nodded enthusiastically. He'd had no idea Mr. Jacoby was going to talk about this today. What were the odds? He grinned. There were no odds. It was the field. He was so excited that he missed the next few minutes of Mr. Jacoby's lecture. It didn't matter. He knew this stuff. He did tune back in, though, when Kimberly Bergstrom raised her hand. Well, he sort of tuned back in. He heard her question, "Is this just theory?" He also heard the start of Mr. Jacoby's answer. "Not entirely. Consider the scientific trend. Before the scientific revolution—" That's where Greg tuned out again. He got caught up in watching Kimberly. Who wouldn't? Long, inky black hair, amazing green eyes, prettier than any model Greg had ever seen. Greg felt himself flush, and he whipped his gaze away from Kimberly before someone caught him staring. Too late. Hadi nudged him again, and when Greg looked over, Hadi made goofy goo-goo eyes at him. Greg shifted his attention back to Mr. Jacoby. As usual, Greg was the last one out of the room when class was over. Mr. Jacoby smiled at him as Greg gathered his stuff, and Greg gave another thought to talking to his teacher. Then he felt his phone vibrate. Waving at Mr. Jacoby, Greg pulled out his phone as he stepped into the hallway. He looked at the screen. "Hello, Greg."